let's, we'll pray first and then we'll go ahead and get started. Father God, we just thank you for this evening. Thank you for giving us life and health, to be able to be here, have our senses about us. Thank you for just keeping us safe to this point. Thank you for Sunday, visiting with us wherever we may have been. Lord, we just pray that you help us tonight to glean through these lessons. Lord, to pick up those things that we need to catch. Lord, that we'll be observant. Not just with our physical eyes to read the words and hear the words, but with our spiritual eyes and ears to hear what you're saying to our spirit, because those are the more important lessons anyway. We can read words all day long and it's just print, but when it's empowered, when it's anointed, when it's brought to life by your Spirit, God, it gives us revelation, and it gives us strength, and increases our faith, and just helps us press on. God, we just thank you for all that you've done for us up to this point, all that you're doing right now, and all that you're about to do. And Lord, we also pray for those that are not here, Jason, Derek, and Twyla. Lord, we just pray that you just continue to keep your hand on them and keep them safe wherever they may be. Bring them back over here. When you don't see it, we ask for that home in heaven in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so our lovely Vanna will take down attendance and checks for homeworks. So last week we went through. Yes, sir.
Now, how am I supposed to tell y'all that the teachers part of some hour class that the teachers are in?
Well, we just walked in like 2 minutes ago.
You know,
Okay, let them know we made it. Thank you. Yeah, maybe I should have texted him again and say, hey, we made it. But, so we went through lesson 3 in here, but you guys need to do the homework, so we'll go through those answers, and then we got lesson 4, and you guys should have already done those, so we'll go through those as well, but then we'll do that, and we'll go into lesson 5. So, for lesson 3, did y'all have any trouble with the who, what, and where?
A little bit, but we made it through.
Yeah, it got me a little bit, and I had to go back and kind of look at a couple of them again, and then I was like, oh, okay, I got you. So, all right, so with those, number 1 is what?
Number 1 is Ramesses.
Ramesses. And number 2, Etham. 3, plagues. 4, yep. 5,
Israel.
yes.
Darkness.
Darkness.
I am.
Bam.
Moses.
Moses. I guess, I don't know, did y'all run into that where at first you the squares didn't,
Match up.
you didn't think, oh, I gotta put a letter in the square?
No,
That
I
was,
did
that
that
was the
first.
first thing that got me.
First.
And then when I realized that, then I went back and did it again, and then I still had one little problem, but anyway. So all your squares add up to give you the name of Rephidim. All right.
Yeah, mine did. I didn't know that until I asked you. I was
Yeah.
like, what are they talking about? What?
All right, so the next 2 questions are name 2 events that occurred at this place. Well, if you didn't do the first part, you wouldn't know what place. So at Rephidim, what are 2 things that happened? I've got 4 here, so you can just name 2 of them.
Well, we got the burning bush, and Moses standing on holding up.
I have, that's where they were, people were fussing at Moses. They were saying, why didn't you bring us here, because there was no water, and that's what he struck the rock.
Water from the rock, that's 1.
And that's that Joshua won the war there.
Defeated the Amalekites, right? So that's 2. I don't have down the burning bush. Yeah.
Defeated.
So we had water from a rock, and then the Israelites defeated the Amalekites. 2 other things that happened there was Moses divided his authority. These are just for reference if you wanna know. And the last one I had down here was that Jehovah Nissi is revealed. N-I-S-S-I, Jehovah Nissi.
Okay, and Jehovah Nissi was revealed.
Right. All right. Give the number 1.
400.
Yeah, 400.
So, depending on where you look, you could get two different
Yeah,
answers.
430.
So if you read in Exodus 12, verse 40, it says 430 years. If you read in Genesis 15 and 13, it tells you 400 years. If you read
14 what? Genesis.
Genesis 15, verse 13.
What was the Exodus?
15.
Exodus was 12:40.
12:40.
Bless you. If you read Acts 7, verse 6, you'll get 400 years. And if you read Genesis 3:18, you get 430 years. So I would have given you credit either one if you gave 400 or 430. So,
Now that won't be
Any
one of
reason for
the.
the difference?
you know, and that is a very good question. It's like, how do you explain the difference? Is that not an error? I didn't have the time to go dig into it to really get to the bottom of that. We know that when God revealed it to Abraham, he told him 400 years, right? So, you know, is it a matter of the writer trying to be real specific versus other writers just saying it was about 400 years? That's what I think, but I did not take the time to go and research that to be sure.
That's fair.
So will that be one of the questions on the test?
Right now, I have no clue.
But you'll give us credit for either, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Again, the goal is not to make y'all fail, right? But I'm not gonna make it like baby food either. So, I want it to be a little bit of challenge, but not like hard. I want y'all to succeed, right?
They like the baby food.
Yeah, I sometimes wonder if people are like counting when Joseph was defeated, because he was there for so many years and then later,
Yeah,
so.
yeah, possibly. All right, then the last section here, underline, no, I'm sorry, the number 2. I was gonna skip a whole section. Number 2, what is that?
70.
So,
I got 66 persons and
so
87.
66 came with Jacob, not counting his son's wives. 66. Now, in other places, people generally say 70.
Yeah,
I saw that in it too, it's 70, spelled it out.
Yeah,
So
and I,
66.
in the scripture, it tells you that it was 66 persons,
Right.
not counting, and I'm sorry, I didn't write down the scripture reference here, but not counting his son's wives. Now, if his son's wives, if that was 4 women, then 66 and 4 would be 70. So,
He had a bunch of sons. So
yeah,
if
he had a
were
bunch of
married-
sons, but they weren't all the same age, so, were they all married? I don't know.
Well, maybe this the next one's right.
Yeah.
There were no discrepancies.
And again, do not be afraid if you feel like that you got the right answer, challenge me, because that's why we're here, to learn. So if I miss one, I need to know that I missed it, because I gotta teach this class 2 more times. All right, number 3,
40.
40,
Yeah.
40, that's good.
You got
Number 4,
10.
10.
I got 10.
Where the 10th leg at? I saw 9 on
Oh, there's always been 10.
10, that's on the favorite.
The last one was with the
Firstborn.
death of the firstborn, and that's where the
Oh,
Passover
okay.
came from.
there. Okay. Oh, so you got one right.
And the number of Israelite men to leave Egypt,
600,000.
600,000. 6, the number of months spent traveling to get to Mount Sinai,
3 months.
3 months. And then number 7, the number of Israelites who died because they worshiped the golden calf,
3,000.
3,000.
Mm-hmm.
Be careful of your choices, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right, underline the correct answer. First one,
Zipporah.
Zipporah. Number 2,
Going out.
going out. Number 3,
Egyptian,
Israelite. Number 4,
ticks.
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 Right. Ticks was not a plague, even though you might call it a plague. And 5, had. Moses had been to Mount Sinai before leaving there. All right, so that was lesson 3. Let's go ahead and, I'm gonna go ahead and, I'm debating on how to do this. Should we just go ahead and do the answers? Yeah, let's just do that. Let's just go ahead and do the answers and then we'll go through the lesson. So y'all did number 4, right? Or lesson 4?
Mm-hmm.
I did 3.
We all know it was 2 lessons tonight. Every night. Look at the syllabus.
I didn't know
There's
that.
2
Oh,
lessons
I
every
didn't
night.
look at, I'm sorry. I looked at it now.
All right, so we got confused. Let's get the syllabus out. Look at that again. So I want y'all to be straight, because I want to be straight. So
Yes, I agree with one, too.
on the syllabus, week 1, we did the orientation, but we went ahead and went through that first lesson to give y'all a head start. Week 2, we went back through that first lesson to do the answers, and we went through lesson 2 or 3, 2 and 3, so Genesis 2, and then Exodus. And then this week we would go through Leviticus, Numbers, and then we'll go ahead and jump into Numbers 22. So I'm trying to help y'all stay one lesson ahead as we go through this.
So we have 2 homework assignments to
Each
each
week,
okay, yeah.
until week 7, there'll be 3. And that's right before the midterm. And that's just because we got to squeeze it in.
Okay, so,
Oh, we supposed to actually.
so next week it'll go ahead and take care of 5 and 6 when we come in here, or 5, 6, and 7.
Whatever the numbers are, it'll be, we'll go, you need to have the homework done for Numbers 22, through Deuteronomy and Joshua. Those 2 lessons.
5 and 6.
Yeah, we should have wrote the lesson numbers in here, I didn't think that.
Okay, so 5 and 6 next week,
Right.
which will be September 27th.
Yes.
Okay.
So I apologize if I confused y'all, but that was the plan all along.
What, 5 and 6?
Yeah, 27th.
All right, so y'all don't have the homework done for lesson 4.
Listen,
Okay, well, we'll just have to double up and do an extra one next week on the answers.
so we'll do 3 next week.
All right, so lesson 4. So tonight, we need to go through lesson 4, because we did lesson 3 last week, which we did the answers for 3, and then 4, we should have done the answers too. We're gonna go through 4, and then we'll also try to go into lesson 5 to give y'all the head start for next week. All right. Leviticus. The first thing you need to know about this book is it's Shalisha's favorite.
That's untrue.
She,
This is my least favorite.
she's like, they could have just left that book out. She said, every time I try to read through the Bible, this is the hardest one. It just takes me forever. It is pretty difficult. Well, I'll say difficult. It's challenging because it's a lot of legal stuff, a lot of ceremonial stuff, there's not a lot of excitement in the book. It's mostly rules and regulations and laws. So the book Leviticus literally means it's about the Levites. Now, what is significant about the Levites?
They're priests.
That's the tribe that God chose to be the priests. That's where the priesthood came from. So this book, Leviticus, is a book all about the Levites, which is all about the priesthood, which is all about all the law and the ceremonies and all that stuff. So this book contains all the laws on offerings. Have y'all ever, how many different kinds of offerings have you read about in the Bible? I'll give you the easy one first, the burnt offering. We all know about the burnt offering, right? You know, they kill the thing, throw it on the fire, burn it. What other kind of offering They all have value, but none of them really were money. There's a meal offering. There is a peace offering. There is a sin offering,
S-I-N?
S-I-N, and there's a trespass offering. All these laws. Now, I didn't take the time to go deep into that, tell you exactly what each offering is for and when you do it and all that kind of stuff. I'll leave that for your own enjoyment. But just know that there were different kinds of offerings. You know, everything wasn't a burnt offering. Everything wasn't about, you know, killing an animal and burning it. The book of Leviticus was also about the priest's function. It talks about what portion of the offering that they got to have. You say, what do you mean, what portion of the offering they got? So the way God set it up, if, let's just say, if I was the priest, if I was the Levite, I don't have any possession, I don't have any land, but I do have the priesthood. Y'all don't have the priesthood, y'all are the tribes, but you have land. And so my job as the priesthood is the intercessor between you and God. And so when you bring your offerings to God, you give it to me, and I go handle it and, you know, actually make the offering. You know, you bring me the animal, I kill it and dress it up like it's supposed to be. But I also get to keep part of it, because that's how the Levites fed their families. They took the portion, and it would tell them, you know, you're supposed to take, you know, a certain shoulder or flank or something like that. You know, it was a choice piece of meat that was given out of that offering to the Levite family, and then the rest of it was the burnt offering. Out of each of those offerings, the meal offering, the peace offering, the sin offering, trespass offering, some of those were, you were supposed to bring flour, like in a meal offering. Some of those you brought barley. Some of them you brought turtle doves, or, you know, things like that. So in each of those, there was a portion of that offering that was dedicated to the priests, so that they could feed their families. And, you know, Shalisa brought up the monetary part. So as people brought their gifts to the tabernacle, part of the money that would come to the tabernacle to keep everything up, you know, part of that came to the priesthood also. It was like a tithe off of the tithe. So as people brought their tithes, you know, a tithe out of that would go back to the priesthood, so they could, you know, maintain their homes and their families. Which is kind of, you know, if you think about that, really, that's the way we should think about it for, you know, paying a pastor to be the leader of a church. You know, as the tithes come in to run the church, that leader of the church, being the priest of the church, should get a tithe off of what comes in, right? Where that comes in to be a problem sometimes is you'll have a leader of a big mega church, right? The church is bringing in $10 million every week. Well, if you take a tenth of that, well, that's $1 million a week. So, you know, T.D. Jakes or whoever, you're making $1 million a week? Maybe. You know, some churches are set up that way, some are not. You know, and it just the different ways that it's set up, we can't even count, because it all depends on how that particular church is set up. But, you know, it's within reason to suggest that that would be appropriate. You run into problems then, though, because this one guy's getting all his money and everybody starts pitching a fit. Well, I don't know why he's getting so much money and everything. So that's, you know, that's a whole different ballgame. We won't even go there. But just, it's kind of a reflection. You know, we pay a pastor to pastor a church. It's kind of a parallel to, you know, part of the offerings that people brought in their tithes. Part of that went to the priests so that they could take care of their homes, because they didn't have any property. They couldn't grow crops and raise cattle and all that kind of stuff. All right. So the portion of that, it also talked about purification of women. Now, why would you need to have purification of women? Guys, be careful of your answers. it all comes down to that time, right? Time of the month. And, you know, it's part of the curse, you know, from the garden, but it's part of nature. That's just how it works. But you have to, unfortunately, but you have to deal with it, right? So if you don't deal with it properly, then it can create a lot of disease and problems. And so God had specific rules that they were supposed to follow. So when a woman was having her time, basically anything she sat on or touched had to go through this purification process. But it wasn't to penalize her, it was to protect her family and the whole nation of Israel.
It sure felt like that. I'm just saying.
It also talked about how to deal with leprosy. So leprosy was a terrible disease. There was no cure. The only way you got cured is if somehow miraculously God healed you. And the only way you could claim to be healed is there were steps that you had to go through. If you felt like you had been healed, you had to present yourself to a priest. And that priest would then put you kind of in quarantine, and he would check you for several days repeatedly and make sure that you didn't have any new signs and all that kind of stuff. And then after you completed that process, then he would declare you clean and you could come back into the camp. Because once you got leprosy, you're out of camp because you're contagious. You could give that to everybody. I mean, anything you touch is contaminated. So that's the reason you hear in the New Testament where anybody, you know, the lepers, they had to declare unclean, unclean, so you wouldn't come close to them because you didn't need to catch that. It also talked about how to observe the Day of Atonement and all the other festivals. So all the important, the significant feasts, you know, the Passover, the Day of Atonement, the Feast of Tabernacles or Trumpets, you know, all of those pure is a more newer thing. But anyway, dealt with all of those festivals that God had assigned that they would observe and celebrate. So all of these things that the priests did, why would they be recorded in the Old Testament? I mean, obviously that's when it happened, but why would they be written down for us to have today? Can you think of a reason why? Throw something out.
Why would it be written so we'll know what to do? So you don't repeat it.
Yeah, well, so, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So basically, you know, we talked last week about how there's a lot of parallels, you know, from things that happened in the Old Testament to the New Testament and even to today. And so the things that the priests did, those functions and those rules and those regulations and those processes and all of that are important to help us to understand the New Testament, why things were done a certain way. And then when Jesus came, how that he came to fulfill the lack that these things represented.
Right.
So, can y'all think of the 10 Commandments right quick? 10 Commandments.
Steal, kill, coveting neighbors' stuff.
Right.
No,
No God before me.
no
Right.
graven images.
Yeah, that's the same one.
Don't say the
I
Lord's
was
name.
Always name in vain.
To keep the Sabbath day holy.
Uh-huh.
Honor your father and your mother.
Jerry did real good.
We shall not murder,
Yeah, I said that one.
not commit adultery,
Okay, adultery.
no stealing,
Said that one.
Lying.
no false witness,
False witness.
and no covet.
So, the first 4 are you and God, man and God. The 5th one, remember or honor your father and mother. You know, that's the one between you and your family, and then the rest of them deal with you and other people. So you kind of remember them that way. There's, you know, the first 4 are between you and God, and then the 5th one's between you and your family, and the last 4 are between you and everybody else. So those 10 Commandments, I want you to go back through that list in your head and tell me which one can save you. Which one tells you if you do this, you're saved? There's not one. Matter of fact, which one of those tells you if you do this, then you'll be righteous or holy? None of them. Now, one of them does give you a promise that if you do this, you'll live a long life, right?
Yeah.
Honor your father and mother.
Amen.
So, all that the Ten Commandments did was show us where we fall short. It was the law, and you could die if you broke the law, but it could not save you. It could not make you holy. It could not make you righteous. All it did was show you there's a standard that God has, and you're not there. Which sounds kind of sucky, right? I mean, but Paul kind of pointed that out in the New Testament. He said, I didn't know sin until I understood the law. When I learned the law, I realized I'm a sinner. But until then, I had no sin because I didn't know I was breaking the law. The law came to show us where we break the law, and ultimately to show us that we need God because we can't keep the law. As hard as we try, we just can't do it. And so Jesus came to fulfill the law. That gap that we couldn't get there, Jesus did that. And he says, I give you my righteousness because I did this. I give you my righteousness and I take your sin away. And so all of these things that we see the priests doing, Jesus is our high priest. He's now in heaven serving eternally as the high priest, interceding for us and watching over us and making sure we are protected and our promises are provided and needs are met and all those things that he does. But in the New Testament, we see Jesus coming to fulfill all of these things about purification. All of these things about dealing with leprosy or any other disease. All of these things about what did those festivals and holidays, what did they really mean? And Jesus demonstrated the significance of those, why they were important. And so, it's important for us to learn the origin of them so that we understand here's where they came from. But in the New Testament, we see that they were set up to help us get ready for Jesus' coming. They helped us see where we were missing it. They helped us see where we were lacking, where we were falling short. But Jesus was that gap. He filled in the gap. He covered us. Questions, comments?
Yeah, and you talked about, the fact that Jesus came. So we're living under the dispensation of grace right now because Jesus came.
Mm-hmm.
The people back in this time, or even right now, the Jews right now, they're still living under this law right here.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have heard, but right now,
The 5 red heifers?
the what?
The 5 red heifers?
The heifers that they have now, they're really excited about these heifers that they're getting ready to kill for sacrifice, sacrificial. They're getting ready. Yeah.
So, y'all know the significance of that? So, as part of the burnt offering, and on the Day of Atonement, they had to offer a pure sacrifice. What that meant was it had to be a red heifer. It couldn't have any other hair. It had to be completely red. So no grays, no browns, no blacks, and they had lost it for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Nowhere could they find a red heifer that was completely red, and now they have it.
Yeah, it comes from Texas, and they're really excited about it.
Yeah. Well, they've been trying. I remember when I was in college, they were trying to breed them to create another red heifer, and they just couldn't get it. And so, so here we are 30 years later, and they finally got it. And I saw that article the other day. I didn't read the whole thing, but there were 5 of them I think they shipped over there. So that's signs of the times, because they're going to start. Let's talk about that for just a second. So, why is that significant? So there's one reason, like you said, because they're still living under this law, and they haven't been able to offer the sacrifice, so they've been having to live in this sin. And well, oh my goodness, we've got to offer a sacrifice. Well, now they can offer a sacrifice. But what's another significant meaning to them being able to offer sacrifice? Because where would they offer it?
They get ready to rebuild the temple.
They always did it at the temple, right? What's the most controversial place on the planet? The Temple Mount. Because the Israelites believe it's theirs, the Muslims believe it's theirs.
It's a mosque right now, yeah.
So, you know, and Christians believe it's theirs, you know, because that's where Jesus was crucified. So, you know, all the three biggest religions on the planet, well, most popular, I guess, religions on the planet, claim that place as the most holy place. So it's been fought over thousands of years. Now, they're going to get ready to offer this sacrifice. So where are they going to do it? So are they going to tear down the mosque, or are they going to build the temple on another site? You know, I mean, so there's some stuff that's got to be figured out. But when they do, when they figure out, hey, we're going to build the temple here, we're going to build the altar again, and we're going to go through all these rituals, and we're going to offer this sacrifice. When they do that, what's significant after that?
It's gonna lead to the coming of Jesus again.
And right before that
It's the
is
7 years.
the revealing of the Antichrist.
Christ, yeah, Antichrist will come for it, yeah.
He is going to set himself up
Yeah.
on the altar and claim that he is God.
He's got right. He's
And
gonna-
that's referred to as the abomination of desolation.
Then we have the 7 years.
Right.
Yeah, after that.
So, you know, it's something to keep an eye on, you know, just to be aware of. I'm not saying lose your mind over it.
Right,
You know,
right.
If you follow Jesus, just trust him. He'll get you through. But as far as world events go, that is pretty significant. All right, so all these things play an important role in us being able to understand the New Testament book, particularly of Hebrews, where it talks a lot about the parallels of how Jesus was a better sacrifice, and he offered a better covenant and a better law, and you know, so it'll help to understand that. Moses consecrated Aaron in the book of Leviticus in chapter 16, in Exodus 16. But Aaron was the first of the Levitical priests. Then Aaron turned right around after Moses anoints him to be the priest, and he leads the people in this, you know, chaotic mass orgy worship at this golden calf over in Exodus chapter 32. So why is that significant? Why would that story even be in there?
Show Aaron is still human.
It shows that Aaron is still human. It showed the people that you can bring your sacrifice to Aaron because he understands what it means to miss the mark. God chose him to be the priest, but he still missed the mark, but God still chose him. And so when you bring your sacrifice, you're not walking before somebody that is perfect. You're not standing in front of somebody that's looking down their nose at you going, I can't believe you did that. You're so weak. You're so lame, you know. But they were offering a sacrifice, and Aaron being somebody who was just like them. And we get the parallel with Jesus, who was a man in like flesh, just as we are, who knew sin, but did not commit sin. He was capable of sinning, he just never did. And so he understands our plight, our troubles and our struggles. He understands because he lived in this flesh. He understands the desires of the flesh, but he was able to resist it. And so when we come to him, just like they came to Aaron, knowing that Aaron totally blew it, because Aaron blew it, he messed up. They knew that he understood. And we know that Jesus understands, even though he didn't blow it. Thankfully he didn't, because he was the perfect sacrifice. There are specific things commanded by God in these rituals. And as you read through the story here in this lesson, you found Nadab and Abihu. Who were they? Aaron's sons, right? And what did they do?
They didn't do what was commanded.
They didn't do what was commanded. They were offering a sacrifice, but they didn't do it according to God's rules. And so it was called a strange fire, right? It was unfamiliar. It was not God's fire. And so because they broke the rules, because they disobeyed, and ultimately what that boils down to is God said, I put you in place to do this task, to do this job. You are in front of the people. You are an example to the people of obedience and following my rules and my commandments and my statutes and living within the covenant. But you have chosen to disrespect me, to disobey me, and you're doing it in front of all the people. So judgment immediately came. God really didn't have a choice, right? Because if he lets them get away with it, then all the people say, well, we can get away with anything. If he lets them away with it, then he needs to let us away with it. And so they offered this strange fire. Now they knew better. They just, for whatever reason, made the choice to not do better. And, we I think, find ourselves in that case sometimes, that we sometimes know better and we just don't choose better. But anyway, so Nadab and Abihu died because they offered that strange fire. That kind of gets us through the book of Leviticus. Anybody have questions or comments, anything specific on Leviticus? All right, let's jump into Numbers then. What is the book of Numbers about? What does it mean?
Men never fighting.
Usually people say that it comes from the numbering of the people, and that's correct. The book here tells us that it's called Bemidbar, which means in the wilderness. And so Numbers covers the time when they were wandering around after they left Egypt. They've gotten to Mount Sinai. A lot of the stuff has been set up, the tabernacle, and all this stuff, and the priesthood has been established, and now they're wandering around, right? And so the book of Numbers is documenting all that time while they were wandering around. When that first numbering came, how many men capable of fighting were there? 603, 550. That's a lot of men. So again, that's a lot of people. What's the most number of people you've ever had to feed at one time?
You went 603,000.
So
easier
So even with the food pantry, there'll be bunches and bunches of people come through here, but it's what, 100 people, 200 people or something. It's nothing compared to 600, and that's just the men that are old enough to fight. So you've got younger men, you've got older men that are too old to fight, you've got all their wives, you've got all their children. This is a lot of people, and somehow they're looking at Moses to feed them because they're not living on the land raising crops. They're moving around. They really don't even have any animals. I think they probably borrowed some when they left Egypt to pull carts and stuff like that. But it's not like they have these big herds of sheep and goats and rams and all that. They just wander around out in the desert. And so they got to eat. Well, they noticed that, right? And we know that they complained about it here a little bit. The Levites were not counted as fighting men. So even that 603,550, there was a whole tribe that didn't even count in that number. Now, why would that be?
They were taking care of the tabernacle.
They were taking care of the tabernacle. God told David that, when David said, y'all remember David wanted to build a temple, right? That was David's plan. I'm going to build God a house. And God told him, no, you're not. Y'all remember that? Why did God tell him, no, you're not going to build him one, but your son will? Because he had blood on his hands. David was a fighting man. He was a soldier. He killed a lot of people. And God told him, you can't have blood on your hands and do this pure work. And so he said, but I am going to give you peace so that your son can build my house. And so Solomon was able to do that. So that kind of helps us to understand why the Levites were not counted as fighting men, because they weren't supposed to fight. They were not supposed to shed blood other than the sacrifice, because they needed to remain pure and consecrated to God so that they could offer the sacrifices and not end up like Nadab and Abihu. Numbers gives us some regulations governing a bunch of things. So, like the redemption of the firstborn. There was always a blessing for the firstborn. You always had the, with Abraham, there was the covenant that was made with the circumcision. I'll think of it in a second. Circumcision, removing the foreskin and, that being the sign of the covenant. They were also talking about the duties of the Levites in moving the tabernacle. That was a big ordeal, just moving the tabernacle every time they needed to move. Also talked about their duties of dealing with uncleanness, dealing with trespasses, dealing with restitution. So if you're stolen or killed or whatever, dealing with the suspicion of adultery, figuring out, whether somebody had really committed adultery or not. Dealing with a Nazirite vow. Y'all heard of that before? Nazirite vow? Samson was supposed to have had a Nazirite vow. So you would not cut your hair, you wouldn't partake of any kind of wine, those kind of things. So also dealt with the purification of the Levites themselves. So they had this big, what they call a laver, basically a big hot tub, where the priests would actually have to get in and bathe themselves in the outer court as part of their purification before they could proceed on into more intimate court in the tabernacle. Also dealt with their regulations of keeping the Passover. Every family had to sacrifice a lamb, a first-year lamb, at the Passover. Just like they did back in Egypt. And it was not because we want to kill a bunch of lambs. It was because we want to remember that because of the blood covenant, the death angel passed over us, but it got the Egyptians, got our enemies. Which is kind of a foreshadowing of Jesus being that lamb that was slain, and the shedding of his blood being applied to our life is why the death angel passed over us and we get to have eternal life. And all these regulations, in Leviticus, a lot of stuff is kind of listed out sometimes, but in Numbers, it's kind of spread through the book. As you read it, you'll pick up these different things. All right, as we move on further, how did the children of Israel get around in the desert? Let me ask a better question. How did the children of Israel know when to move, when to stop, and where to go? The cloud. So it was a cloud. What you said? A cloud by day, and what else?
Fire by night.
Pillar of fire by night.
Pillar of fire by night. So basically, that cloud that they saw in the daytime that gave them some shade and led them where they needed to go, it turned into a big cloud of fire at night, which gave them warmth and because in the desert it gets cold at night. Gave them warmth, gave them protection from enemies, and also gave them some light in the darkness. So it's kind of interesting. I can't imagine being any of those people that lived around that region and seeing this big cloud, this big pillar of fire in the middle of the night just hanging in the sky. It's like, I don't know who these people are, but you don't want to mess with them. So Israel moved when the cloud moved, whichever way and whenever. And they never knew. They just noticed when the cloud would come and settle over the tabernacle, And when it was time to move, the cloud would rise up off the tabernacle and begin to move in a certain direction, and they would then start packing everything up. Load your stuff up, let's go. Now, the book of Numbers records a lot of complaining, a lot of murmuring and whining and moaning and so at Taberah was one of the first places it talks about. Here is where the people murmured against Jehovah, and God sent a fire to just consume some of them. People talk about today that, you know, that Jesus is all love, right? And Jesus was very much about love and forgiveness and grace and mercy and all that kind of stuff. But what we have to understand is that God is still God of justice too. And that even though Jesus is willing to forgive us, there are consequences to our actions. I believe it's in Hebrews, it says that we ought to raise our children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. If you take those two words, nurture is the loving, admonition is the limits. So the love and the limits, you got to have both. And if you've ever been around, and you as a teacher I know full well, if you've ever been around kids, some parents, they're all about the love. Their kid can do no wrong. They forgive them for everything. I can't believe you would be down on my child. He never does anything wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And then other parents are so strict, the child can't move a toe without getting beat. And so, you know, the minute they get out of the house, they go, but wow. You know? And so you got to have love and limits. Otherwise, you have a distorted view of God. If you don't understand that, yes, He is all loving, but at the same time, He is going to issue out justice. You've got to live understanding both of those. And so we see the God of justice in Mount Sinai here. That, you know, when He came down on the mountain to give them the law, you know, He said, don't even touch the mountain because you'll die. Even the cattle, if they try to climb up the mountain, they're going to die because God was on the mountain. It wasn't to be mean. It just, that's the rule.
Yes.
Here's what I'm telling you. You obey the rules, you'll be fine. If you break the rules, there's death to pay. But then you go to Mount Calvary, and we see the love. You know, so you got Mount Sinai, the limits, Mount Calvary, the love. But you got to have both. Otherwise, you have this distorted view of God. You can't understand why He does things. So why does God allow all this evil stuff? Why does God let bad things happen? Well, you're only looking at Mount Calvary. You're just looking at Jesus, forgiving everything, and He's all about love and healing and saving people. But you're forgetting that He's still the same God of Mount Sinai who killed people. And, I mean, because they broke His law. So, God don't put bad stuff out there. He knows we're going to take care of that. We're going to do enough bad stuff on our own. He don't have to generate no bad stuff. But He'll use it for our good. Right?
I know I used to always say that. I know the word always teaches that God is the same yesterday, today, tomorrow. But you know, I've always liked reading the Old Testament too. But I like the fact that, to me, in the Old Testament, God gets to play. If you did wrong,
Right.
there was no gray line in between that. That's it. But then when you go to the New Testament, there's grace. So, but I still say that when they say to fear God, but fear Him with love, because He is love.
Yeah.
But at the same time, if you be disobedient,
He got
you
down.
get a chance at it. You know what I'm saying? So for me, in that time, during then, I know I probably would be the ones that would definitely fear God. No, I ain't doing that wrong.
You see Leonard running across the camp with a fire of God chasing him.
That's it.
No,
can't do no wrong.
Sometimes too, when people want to dispel God's word, that's what they use. Why was God so mean? Why did He kill people?
Yep.
Yeah, so.
And you know, and in addition to that, you know, like I think you said, He set a precedent. You know, I know we live under this grace now, but still, there was a precedent that here. That's why it's important to study this here, because we gotta know that He's not playing.
Right.
No game.
No game.
Yep.
No game.
Amen. So at Taberah, the people complained and God consumed them with fire. The reason is they were complaining about their situation, but they wasn't praying to God about it. So think about that in your own life, because that's a lesson that we need to understand. I may want to complain about my situation. I may have hurt feelings about my situation. I may hate my situation. And I may complain about it, but I better go to God with it. Because just complaining, if I'm claiming to be a believer, but all people ever hear is me complaining about my situation, that don't give no glory to God. It takes some glory away. So always pray about your situation. In Numbers 11, we have them complaining again at Kibroth Hattaavah. They were looking for, they were lusting after the meat of Egypt. Right? Ain't got no meat out here. Ain't nothing meat on us. So, and again, God gave them, the quail and the manna. I mean, He gave them so much. It's more than they can handle.
They say God has a sense of humor.
Oh yeah.
I'm gonna give you some meat.
Oh yeah. Oh, I got your meat. Just give me a minute. Just wait.
Got a whole plenty of
Arby's think they got the meat, but God, they got nothing on God. So, but then it says that also many died of a plague, but it was because of their lust for the meat of Egypt. Well, what were they in Egypt? They were slaves. I keep going back to this quote that, our flesh will make us crave what once made us a slave.
I like that.
Even when we weren't happy there in the first place. Even when we hated it. We'll crave what was making us a slave, even when we hated it. Our flesh is so evil. Why? Why would I want to do that? I hated that. Why would I go do it again? Because I crave it. And it's like Paul said in Romans 7, there's this battle going inside of me where I know what to do, but I choose not to. And when I know that I shouldn't do this, I find myself doing it. And it's this constant battle of that evil and good trying to win inside of us. And that's why it's so important for us to stay in communion with God, so that when we do face those moments, we more often choose God than choosing flesh.
Well, sometimes too, if we relate it to everyday living now, people want to change, but they don't. It requires changing your environment, your circle, because you can't get a true transformation if you got the stuff somebody constantly bringing it in your presence, so and people don't understand that. Well, we're supposed to be able to, they start justifying, we're supposed to be able to interact with everybody. You're not ready.
Right.
You're not ready. Yeah.
And that is so true. I mean, I'm sure we've all been there, and you as I say, we turned over a new leaf, right? We changed our mind. We're not going to do that no more. But then we put ourselves right back in that same environment that got us in trouble in the first place, thinking I can handle it. As I've changed my mind, I can handle it. But if we're not ready, we're just going to get tripped right back up again.
That's what I keep telling my kids.
Listen to me.
Yes.
But this is the place where Moses also, he got so frustrated, he told God, look, if it's going to be like this, just take me, just kill me, bring me on. I'm
I was
done.
like, do me.
And God said, well, bring me 70 elders, and I'm going to spread some of this leadership on them instead of it all falling on you. So they'll have to carry some of the burden as well. Then we also see that a little later, Aaron and Miriam were speaking against Moses. Why did they speak against Moses? That was their brother. He married a Cushite.
Yeah.
What's the significance of a Cushite?
Appreciate it.
Another tribe.
They were a tribe. At one point, they ruled Egypt. They conquered the Egyptians at one point. But the significance is, and a lot of people do say that she was black, but the significance is that she wasn't Hebrew. And they were only supposed to marry Hebrews.
Right.
Now, Moses, I think, had this wife long before all these laws were given, but they were complaining at him because you got a wife that don't live up to this law. And so they were saying, well, if you gonna get away with that, we need to be, we're just as good as you. Aaron's your brother, I'm your sister, Miriam said, and we ought to be able to rule these people just like you do. And God said, hey, all three of y'all, come to the tabernacle. Come to the principal's office. And God spoke to him. And basically said, what, Aaron and Miriam, what made y'all think? What made y'all think? Do you not know that I have chosen Moses? What made y'all think that y'all could say anything against him? Now, this is also where the Bible says, you know, that it calls Moses was the meekest man on the earth, most humble man on the earth, which that's saying something. But he had to be. I mean, think about what he was having to do and all the things that God did through him. It's like Paul. You know, Paul tells us that God gave him a thorn in the flesh so that because of all the great stuff and miracles that God did through him, he would have got lifted up in pride, but he had this thorn in the flesh that kept him grounded. And God told him, my grace is sufficient. So Moses, same thing, all this miraculous stuff going through him, he could have got lifted up, but God had given him a meek spirit, you know, that humble attitude to keep him so that he could maintain his position and lead these people who needed a leader to get them to the promised land. And so they were jealous, they spoke out against him, and we know that Miriam immediately became a full leper. I mean, she was leper all over. And ultimately, Aaron went to Moses and said, please pray for our sister. Ask God to take that off. And he did. So Moses prayed for her and God healed her. But
She didn't talk no more.
yeah, you were thinking again, weren't you? All right, we're at the break time, so we'll finish on this lesson and go into the next one after the break.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
On the map right here, where they showed the timeline, where they went, that was the promise of Canaan, right? Okay.
So we left off with Miriam got turned into a leper, but then she got healed, so that was good. Bad, but then it's good.
She got in trouble, man, I'm out.
That's right. And like you said, you know, God with a sense of humor. I mean, that's kind of how it is. You know, you run your mouth, and God's gonna call you to the office.
You know how they say, she wrote a check that she couldn't get.
But now, what is a lesson? What is a lesson that we should take personally, but we could also share with other people, especially in this day that we live, that we see from that situation where Aaron and Miriam, who were leaders, but they spoke against Moses,
Keep quiet.
got them in trouble.
Go to God. Yeah, keep your
You
mouth
can't put your
off.
mouth on just anybody.
Well, really, we shouldn't be putting it on anything, anybody. You don't have to have a title.
Right.
Just be quiet. If you
Right.
don't understand, Lord, I don't understand this.
Mm-hmm.
And it might even not even be for you to understand what they got, what he told y'all to do.
And, you know, I think the scripture says, you know, touch not mine anointed. So, you know, don't say, and sometimes that's hard because if somebody's saying something that they are claiming that God told them this, okay, and one, if it don't agree with the word, then yeah, you can shut that down. No, that don't agree with the word. You know, and if you, especially if you've got chapter and verse, what you're saying contradicts this right here, that's a problem. But if you don't have chapter and verse, if you can't show where it's contradictory to the word of God, I would be hesitant to speak against it, even if it's out there and you're like, I'm not even comfortable with it. Just let it alone, because if it's not right, God will deal with it. And the last thing you want to do is find yourself in opposition to God. If God's really using them and that's the message He's given them, then you let God bless them and make sure you don't end up cursed because of it. But, you know, like in worship, that's one of the times when I've experienced, because I grew up in this very traditional country white church, and you know, when I started getting in other churches where people worship different, it was very uncomfortable because that's not how I grew up. That's not what is that even right? Can you do that in church? You know? And there was some judgment in me. It's like, you know, you're not right. You know, you're just doing that for show and stuff. But as I learned and as I came to better understanding, it's like, oh, maybe that is right, you know, because everybody worships different, you know, and so, and then studying Scripture, understanding, you know, don't talk against something that you don't know because you're not the judge. God didn't call you to be a judge.
That's
God
very
called you
good.
to be a servant, and, you know, and he's gonna do the judging. So, go ahead.
And then the other thing too, the lesson that I got from this, the very thing that they were upset with Moses about, the type of person that he married, her being of darker skin, and you see in this curse, her skin was almost turned the complete opposite. She turned white. And so, you know, sometimes the crime, the punishment does fit the crime, and when we say, yeah, listen, it's the complete opposite, so, yeah.
Yeah. What's that? Okay. All right. Now, after that is when they sent the 12 spies. So Moses gathered up, said, you know, he told all those 70 elders, I want you to go get somebody out of each of your tribes, and you guys need to bring, we need one person from each tribe. And we're going to send these 12 guys over into the promised land, and they're going to just spy it out, and they're going to come back and tell us what the land is like, what we can expect. Because God had told them it was going to be a land that was flowing with milk and honey, right? Now, God didn't tell them it's also full of a bunch of evil people and a bunch of giants and, you know, and people that sacrifice their children and worship these strange gods. And, you know, God didn't tell them that. He just, you're going to have to go in and take this land because other people live there, but I have given it to you already. And it's a land that flows with milk and honey. This is the land that I promised to your father Abraham. And so they, hey, well, let's send these 12 spies. Well, the 12 spies go in, but what do we know out of that from Numbers 13 and 14, I guess, with what they spied out? What do they find? That God didn't lie, right? It is a land flowing milk and honey. I mean, you know, they brought back a pole holding a cluster of grapes that took 2 guys to carry. I mean, that's some sick. So either there was a whole lot of little grapes, or there was some really big grapes, one or the other. But either way, it was a lot of grapes. But they also found giants in the land. These warlike people that just, I mean, they said we're like what? Grasshoppers in their eyes. So 10 of the 12 spies said, we're doomed. We can't do this. What were we thinking? Only 2 guys. Who were they? Joshua and Caleb. Only 2 of them believed the report of the Lord. All they were doing was going to just see the good thing that God was giving them. The other 10 were going to see, can we do it? Joshua and Caleb were like, it's already given. Let's just go get it. Let's tell you what it is and which way we'll go first. But the other 10 were looking for a reason why they couldn't. Isn't that kind of like us though sometimes? We go into something God wants us to do looking for the way we can't do it, looking for how we're not good enough, we're not strong enough, we're not smart enough. Moses did the same thing, you know, and we see what happened. Those 10 spies came back with a negative report, an evil report, the Bible calls it, and the people believed them. So, you know, when we start speaking those things, number one, it negatively affects us personally, but it also affects those around us. God told us to do something and we start saying, well, I can't do that, I can't do that, I can't do that. Then your children, your spouse, your family, your church family, all these people start saying, well, I thought they were really close to God, but they just saying can't do that. Maybe God's not as strong as He used to be. Maybe I thought they had really good faith. Man, if they don't have no faith, well, who's got faith? You know, I mean, so it really can be very destructive when we start denying the Word of God, because that's what that was. God gave them the Word. I've given you this land, and rather than accepting the Word and walking in that Word, they denied the Word. Those 10. I know God said it's our land, but we can't take it. Well, God said it's yours. What do you mean we can't take it? It's already yours. Just go get it. But they wanted to deny God's Word. So all that group that were over the age of 20 did not get to enter the land of Canaan, the promised land, except for Joshua and Caleb. So all that murmuring and complaining, all that negative, evil report, all that got them was a 40-year vacation in the desert where they got to die and they never got to make it to the promised land. Fortunately, their children got to make it, but they didn't make it. So after this judgment, Moses came out, because they believed the evil report, the people were afraid, they weren't going to go in. Moses prayed, and God told him, said, look, you need to go tell the people, y'all are cursed. Ain't none of y'all going to enter because you believed this evil report. You didn't believe my word. And so after the judgment, there were two different groups that tried to solve the problem. What did they do?
One group decided to go back to Egypt.
One group wanted to go back to Egypt. Let's just go back to Egypt. We know what we get in Egypt. Isn't that like us a lot of times? Just like that quote I said earlier, our bodies crave what once made us a slave, even when we weren't happy there. Just like those children of Israel in Egypt, they were slaves crying out to God, God, you got to set us free. But now they're free, and they don't want to listen to God, and they don't want to go back.
It was back in.
Don't even make no sense,
That
does it?
is crazy thinking.
But we do that.
They
So-
were free in body, but not in spirit.
Free in body, not in spirit, or not in mind. Yep. What did the other group want to do?
Our group tried to invade the land anyway.
All right, well, God's done reprimanding us. Now we need to go attack. Go attack. No. Listen. When God tells you to do something, He doesn't say, He might say, but most of the time God don't say, when you get to feeling like it, I want you to go share a word with Sister Pam. No, usually what He says is, Leonard, here's what I want you to tell Sister Pam. And He expects you to go do it right then.
They did.
Right? And so they were told, go spy out the land, and then let's get ready, let's go and take it. They decided, no, we can't do it. And then they get in trouble for it. Oh, okay, well we'll go now. Well, no, you've done disobeyed. There's already a judgment. You've got to deal with those consequences now. And so, they tried to go in, but a bunch of them got killed and captured. Both of those things failed. Then later, Shalish and I love this story.
Yeah, enough.
Later, Korah, one of the leaders, he and 250 other leaders, elders of the people, decided in Numbers chapter 16, decided that they would challenge Moses' leadership. Well, I don't know who he thinks he is anyway.
So they didn't know Mary. They missed that memo.
Well, it makes you question, what were you thinking? And how many times, do you look at your child and what were you thinking? And they wasn't thinking. If they was thinking straight, they wouldn't have done what they did. What were you thinking? You wasn't thinking.
Why weren't you thinking?
And so here they are. They've seen everything that God has done. They've seen how God has chosen Moses and used him to lead them through all this time. All these miracles that have happened, all this stuff. And now you're going to challenge and say, and especially with the latest episode where Miriam was a white leper, and now Moses had to pray for her to get healed. And now you're going to challenge? What? That don't even make no sense. Anyway, they do. And what it says is that the earth opened up, just swallowed them up. I mean, imagine you're in the camp, and all of a sudden, all these people that you saw.
Standing
Now
there.
here's the thing.
Yeah.
They're kind of like bullies, right? I mean, that's what bullies do. They get them a following, and then they try to run roughshod over everybody, right? And so here's all these bullies. They've gathered up. They've got their strength in numbers. We're gonna take over. We're gonna put Moses out. We're gonna move him to the side. And now all of a sudden, all these people that were either they respected the bullies, or they were intimidated by the bullies. One or the other. They wanted to be a part of them, or they were afraid of them. One or the other. And all these people are seeing them because they're leaders among the people. And they see what they're doing, challenging Moses, and all of a sudden the ground starts opening up, and they start falling in. I mean, what do you think they did? Run! I know that's what I would have been doing. Get away from that hole. I don't know how big it's going to get, but I don't want to be in it.
Mom would have done something totally different.
I told you.
Just sat there and watched.
Y'all ever remember Sanford and Son? his wife's cousin that always come over, Esther, fish-eyed. So here they are, the earth opens up, I mean, and even after that, it says that there was a plague that came, and 14,700 people died. I mean, how many times have people got to test this envelope with God, to push the boundaries? But, I mean, we see that with our kids. Our kids, as they're growing up, they're always pushing the boundary. How far can I go? What can I get away with? And it's up to us to show them those love and limits. We love them, but we also got to teach them the limits and that there's consequences to your actions. And so we're in this constant. I remember with my kids, you know, you wanted them to be independent. You wanted to be able to trust them to be independent. And so you feed them out some rope, and they start running. And you go, oh, come on. And then they get so far, you have to snatch that rope. You know? And you start reeling them back in because, like, look, I tried to give you some freedom. I tried to give you some liberty, and you try to take advantage of it. You disobeyed. You didn't do what you're supposed to do. Now I got to reel you back in until you show me that you can be obedient, and then I can let a little more rope out again. And I think God does the same thing with us. So here, after this, you know, God says, okay, look, let's have a test of leadership. Y'all think that Moses and Aaron shouldn't be the ones leading. Let's just see who should lead. Let's do it fair. Everybody get your staff, because all these guys walked around with staffs. Everybody get your staff and bring it to the tabernacle. We're going to put them in the tabernacle. Make sure you got your name on it, because we don't want no confusion. Make sure you got your name on your staff. And they put all their rods in the tabernacle. And God said the one that blooms will be the one that's chosen. Now there was one rod for Aaron and Moses, right? But there was a rod from all the other tribes to see who would lead. And in the morning, now remember, they didn't put them in there and leave them for 6 or 8 months. They put them in there and checked them in the morning. And in the morning, one of the rods, one of those staffs that had been cut off of a tree somewhere, stripped and made smooth so you didn't get splinters in your hand, been toted around for who knows how long. This is dead wood. One of them had blossomed and bloomed and generated ripe almonds, ready to eat. Almonds ready to go. Overnight. But there was only one rod that did that, and that was Aaron's rod. And so God was showing the people, look, stop it. I've chosen Moses and Aaron. This is my proof to you. I gave you a fair test. You put your rod out there. I didn't choose you. I chose them. And sometimes that sucks for us. You know, we want to do certain things for God, but if that's not your calling, then just embrace what your calling is. You know, I'm not called to be the senior pastor here, and I'm good with that. What I'm called to do right now is lift him up, lift him and Pastor Molly up, and support them and encourage them and help them with other things, right? That's my calling right now. And until God tells me to go do something different, I'm going to be happy doing that. And if everybody would take that attitude, oh my goodness, you know, church would be so much better, you know, your relationship with God would be better, things would go smoother, and it would draw people in. I mean, that's just, you know, and I'm not saying that our church is not like that. We're generally around here, I think we're like that. But a lot of churches you'll go, and it's just a competition. Everybody trying to jockey for position and trying to be the next man up, and you know, can't wait for that pastor to die or move on and get another church so they can be the next pastor, you know, stuff like that. It's like, dude, you just need to be careful. You treading real close on that coral line. All right, so they did that test, and then we come to Meribah, and the people complain again. This is the one Pam was talking about earlier. We ain't got no water to drink. We starving to death out here. Sounds just like kids. It's hot. I'm starving to death. Got no water. And so they complain, and Moses goes and prays, and God said, go over here, tell the people that I am going to provide for you, and then I want you to go and speak to this rock. What did he say to him?
Speak to it.
Speak to it. But now, Moses is getting on up in years, getting a little ornery maybe, and he got aggravated at the people, right? And basically said, how many times have I got to show you that God, and so he took his staff and he hit the rock.
Now the water still came out because God had already promised He's going to bring water, but Moses had disobeyed. And basically what Moses did is he took glory away from God. He basically stepped in God's shoes for a minute. How many times have I got to do for you? Well, you ain't doing nothing for him without God. And so God said, because of that, you don't get to go in the promised land either. So, it's a sad story for Moses because of all he had gone through and all the times he had saved the children of Israel, how many times he had to pray for God to not kill them all. I mean, there was one time when God said, look, Moses, I'm going to kill them all, and I'll just start over with you. I'll just start with you, and we'll just grow a whole new nation. And Moses, oh, wait, God, you did all these things in Egypt to show everybody who you was, and you was going to save this people because they're your people. And if you kill them all, then what are everybody going to say? They're going to say you couldn't handle them. And of course, we know God was just testing Moses. God had a plan already. All right, so that gets us in the wilderness here. They're getting close to the promised land. Then they come up on this place called Edom. What is the significance of Edom? Who are the Edomites? So go all the way back to Abraham. Who did Abraham take with him that he ended up having to save? Lot. Now, when Lot left Sodom and Gomorrah, got rescued out of the city, his wife got turned into a pillar of salt. When that happened, it was just Lot and his 2 daughters. What happened when they went up into the mountain there? Y'all remember?
Lot, the incest.
So he didn't have any sons. And back then, it was all about having sons to hand down the inheritance and keep the family name and all that kind of stuff. So the daughters thought, well, look, we've got to get some sons for our father. So they got him drunk, and one of them slept with him one night, and they got him drunk the next night, and the next one slept with him, and they both had babies.
But he was drunk.
He was drunk.
But me and Steve had a debate about that. Because I feel like it's not his fault. He was drunk.
How drunk was he? I don't know. He wasn't so drunk that things didn't work, apparently. So,
Well, yeah, no. Well, he wasn't a part of the plan.
But the bottom line is, one of those daughters had a son named Ammon, and the other one had a son named Moab. And so, I'm sorry, Edom. Had one Edom and Ammon. So the Edomites come from, I'm jumping ahead. That's the next one. Edom is from Esau. I'm sorry, I totally misled y'all, got off on my notes here. Esau is the one that the Edomites come from. And Esau is the brother of Jacob, right? Remember they had to fight because Jacob stole the birthright and they split ways. And then they did reconcile. But then Jacob and all the children of Israel ended up down in Egypt, but Esau and all of his descendants stayed in the land. Well, they grew to be a great nation too, and they developed into the Edomites. And so the Edomites, now here the children of Israel, they're trying to get to the promised land that God has promised them, but they've got to get through to the other side of Edom. Well, Moses sent, went in there and said, hey, give us permission to cross your land. We won't do anything. We're just trying to get to our promised land. And they wouldn't let them go. Wouldn't let them cross. And so, that was a problem. You're getting delayed in getting to the promised land because of this. Well, at the same time, it came time for Aaron to die. And so God, how would you like this? God told Moses, tell Aaron to get his son Eleazar and let's go up on the mountain because it's time for Aaron to die. You're not just getting replaced, you're dying. It's not like you don't just get fired. You didn't get demoted. You just died. And so they went up on the mountain, sure enough, Mount Hor, and Moses took all the garments off of Aaron, the priest garments, the ephod and all the breastplate and all that stuff, and he put it on Eleazar. And when he did, it said that Aaron just dropped dead. So that was the end of Aaron. But now you have a new high priest in Eleazar. During this delay, there was more complaining. And what happened then? The fiery serpents. So there was, what is the fiery serpents? I'm not exactly sure. I doubt that it was snakes running around through the wilderness on fire. But something was explained as a fiery serpent. So maybe it was just snakes that had a really burning venom. So when they got bit, there was a lot of burning or something. But anyway, it was referred to as fiery serpents. And the people started begging Moses, please pray to God to get rid of this. But instead of getting rid of them, God told Moses to form a brass snake and put it up on this pole in the middle of the camp. And so if anybody happened to get bit by one of those fiery serpents, if they would look on that brass snake, then they would be healed and it wouldn't kill them. Now, what does that make you think of?
Laying with the blood issue.
Doing it?
Oh, what you gonna say? Issue of blood, I said, blood issue. Laying with the issue of blood.
How, in what way?
Well, they looked upon her, they had faith, she touched, and she had faith, and they were healed, she was healed.
Yeah, okay, I see that. I see more of a parallel with Jesus. So we get bit by sin, right? And sin is going to kill us. We will die from sin. The only way to be saved is to look up to what has been lifted up. And Jesus was lifted up on the cross. Brass snake was on a pole in the middle of the camp. And if you'll have faith to look up on him, you will be saved. So it's kind of a foreshadowing of something that was coming. Obviously, the brass snake had no power. It was all about the belief in the Word of God. That God had given Moses to tell the people, if you'll do this, then I'll heal. All right, so then we come to the Amorites. So after they went around the land of Edom, because they couldn't go through, they had to go all the way around, they come to the land of the Amorites. They also wouldn't let them go through. They had a king named King Sihon, and the Amorites were descended from a man named Canaan. And Canaan was one of the sons of Ham. If you remember Shem, Ham, and Japheth, they were Noah's 3 sons. So Canaan was from Ham, one of those 3 sons. And, so they were like, we're not letting you pass through our land either. I guess the Israelites had enough, so they went to fight with them, and they defeated them. And then, once they get through their land, then they come to the land of the Moabites. Now here's where Lot's daughters and their sons come into play, and I apologize for confusing them. But their king was King Og of Bashan, and they wanted to pass through, and they were, no, we ain't letting you pass through. But they fought with them and defeated them too. And so, they defeated King Sihon and all the Amorites. They defeated King Og and all the Moabites in Bashan. The other, from Moab, the brother was Ammon, which is where you get the people, the Ammonites, which we know once Israel goes into the Promised Land, they have to fight the Ammonites. So that's another one that's coming. All right, so that gets us to the end of lesson 4.
Recap. We need to do 4, 5, and 6.
Yes. So next week we'll be checking homework for 4, 5, and 6 because y'all should have had 4 tonight, but there was some confusion. So next week we'll check 4, 5, and 6.
Oh, y'all shaking my heart already?
Yeah.
I do have my homework. I have it. Oh, and I've actually done 5 too, so.
She got ahead of the game.
What?
All right.
Yeah.
So lesson 5, this is like I said, this is where we're trying to get you a little head start into the next 2 lessons. So most weeks you'll have 2 lessons, you know, so next week it should be 5 and 6 that you're working on, right? But you gotta finish the answers for 4 and do 5 and 6. After that, just remember there's 2 weeks, you know, except for that, check the syllabus. There's 3 weeks that week before the midterm. So some weeks we have to do 3 just because we gotta squeeze them all in. All right. Lesson 5, Balak and Balaam. What do y'all know about these guys? We'll have to breeze through this. We only have 1 minute. Balak and Balaam. Yeah, he wanted them cursed. I want you to curse them. Who? What was this? Do it now. Yeah, they were some of the Moabites. You know, this guy leading this group of Moabites was named Balak, and he had called for or sent for this man named Balaam. Now, why did he send for Balaam?
Because he was a prophet, and he was known for either blessing or cursing people.
Right. So Balaam was known to be a prophet. That, you know, things that he predicted or said came to pass. So he was known to be a true prophet. Not necessarily a prophet of God, but a prophet. And so Balak wanted all the help he could get because he had heard about the children of Israel. Hey, look, they've already beat the Amalekites. They skipped over Edom, but then they beat the Amorites, and they beat some of our people, the Moabites, and here they are fixing to come beat up on us. We need some help. So let's get Balaam to pronounce a curse on them so that God will defeat them for us instead of them beating us. So they go to Balaam, and Balaam, you know, reaches out to God to, hey, you know, what do you want me to say here? And God says, well, number one, don't go with them. I don't want you to go. Well, he sent more people and offered more treasure and all this kind of stuff. And did this a couple times, so Balaam kept asking God, and God finally says, okay, well, you can go with them, but you can't curse them. You can only say what I tell you to say. Okay. So he goes, and they take him up on this one mountain, and he shows them the children of Israel, and he says, I need you to curse that people right there. And so Balaam says, well, I'll pray to this Jehovah God, and I'll tell you what he says. But he said, you know, I can't do anything but what he says. So he pronounced a blessing, not a curse. And the guy's like, dude, that's not what I paid you for. Mm-hmm. So they go to another mountain, and they look at him again. It says, that people right there, I need you to curse them. I can only tell you what their God says. And so he prays again, and God tells him to bless them. So he blesses them again. Man, I am going to smack you, you do this again, you know. So they go through this 3 or 4 times until finally, you know, he says, look, I can't. Their God will not let me curse them. Matter of fact, I speak a blessing on them, and anybody else that blesses them, I bless them too. You know, so basically, Balak, your people are left out because y'all trying to curse them. Y'all can't get no blessing. Anyway, so he finally, you know, tells them, you know, all this stuff. And so he's trying to go on his way, and the Lord got angry with him. Jehovah God got angry with him. And so while he's on his way, Balaam is riding a donkey. This is where we hear about the donkey speaking, right? So he's riding this donkey. And God had kind of put some judgment in his path. An angel with a flaming sword. Now, Balaam couldn't see it, but somehow the donkey could. So the donkey turned out of the way, and, you know, to avoid the angel who was in the path, you know. And so Balaam got mad at the donkey, starts beating the donkey. And, you know, so a little later they go a different place, and it's kind of a narrow path, and the angel's blocking the path again. The donkey's trying to go around, and he ends up crushing Balaam's foot against the wall, and he's beating the donkey again. It's like, dude, you don't see this? And so the third time, they're in a real tight place, and there's nowhere to go. And the donkey just sits down and says, well, I'm not going forward because the angel with a sword, I ain't dying for you. Balaam beating that donkey, and finally God allows the donkey to speak. He says, look, how many times have I got to save your life? I mean, what? Can you not see? And then God opened his eyes, and he saw, and he realized the error of his ways. But ultimately, he didn't realize it well enough, because he still went and dealt with Balak, told him, look, if you will deceive the children of Israel, they'll get God to curse them themselves. If you'll just offer them some harlots and get them to marry some of these local women that worship other gods, they'll start doing that, and their own God will curse them. And so that's what they did. Started tripping them up. You okay?
I suppose she's going for braces and I'm chewing them a bit.
So anyway, in one of the battles, both Balak and Balaam died, and so God put his judgment out there. So it's kind of an interesting story that even Balaam, this prophet who wasn't a prophet of God, he was able to hear from God. God spoke to him, but in the midst of all that, God would not allow him to curse his people. So a lot of times you hear people that are afraid of, witch doctors and all that kind of stuff. And, we know that there is some power out there, right? Because, Satan is a fallen angel. He's got all these demons that are other fallen angels, and they're on a mission to destroy us because they can't destroy God. So if we can get to God, then we'll get to God's people. But I find it hard to believe that God would allow, if we're believing on him, that God would allow them to put anything on us. Hexes and curses and all that kind of stuff. I've heard all kinds of stories, and some people say, well, yeah, that can happen, but and maybe I just never been put in that situation, but I just believe that if I'm trusting God, that he's going to take care of it, right? Now, I'm not fixing to run down to the bayou and go find a bunch of witch doctors and dare them to do it, because, really, that would be tempting God, right? I'm going to put God to the test, see if he really can take care of it. And we're not supposed to do that either. Psalm 91 says, he will bear us up, but, we're not supposed to, like in the temptation of Christ, the devil told him, just throw yourself down. Psalm 91 says he'll bear you up when you dash your foot on the stone. And he said, but thou shalt not tempt the Lord your God. So, anyway, just kind of an interesting thought there. Yeah.
Real quick. So, now my thought pattern is, yes, we believe that God can protect us from that stuff, but it's not a thing of, I guess not being blind to the fact that you don't be deceived. He can protect us, but the enemy is there all the time without you knowing it.
Oh, yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you believe in that stuff, but it is a reality,
Right.
especially here in this house.
Well, just you can go all over the internet. The world is very spiritual, whether people want to admit it or not. Everybody's all about spirit. Like it's the law of attraction. If you just put that vibration out there, good stuff will come to you. That's a spiritual thing. We talk to the eternal universe. You're talking spiritual stuff. You're talking beyond this flesh and bone. So the world believes in the spirit world. They just don't want to admit that this Bible tells them about the spirit world. And so we as Christians have an insight that they're not willing to accept. They're not willing to see. And we just need to, like you said, be aware that there is an evil side to the spirit world, because the devil is doing his job. He's going to do his job. But the benefit we have is that we already know he's defeated. He cannot beat God. And if God is protecting us, ain't no way he can get us. Just look at Job. He couldn't do anything to Job until God allowed him to. He had to kind of dare God. Well, if you let me touch him, he'll curse you. Let me take all his stuff, he'll curse you. But it didn't work. All right. What else we got here? I also think it's interesting that Balaam was so determined to get that money from Balak that he finally did tell Balak how to get the Israelites to sin, to go against God. And that's really, you use the word there a minute, Jerry, deception. You know, that's what the devil does. It's deception. You know, the devil the serpent didn't come to Eve and say, hey, you need to go eat that fruit right there. He said, did God really say, maybe he's holding out on you. Maybe he didn't tell you the whole story. You know, just get you to doubt. Just get your thinking twisted a little bit. Just a little bit of deception. And if you'll take that little bit of deception, then he can lead you down a primrose path and
All it took is this much.
into destruction. Right? So Moses had the people numbered again, and this time it was a little bit less, 601, 730 available for war. This is right before they're getting ready to go in to take the land. Then we have the book of Deuteronomy. Now Deuteronomy is, it's actually, the word translated to be the second law. But it's really not the second law, it's really the restating of the first law. It's just, you know, not written down exactly like it was the first time. So it's just, you know, all of the rules and regulations Moses restated to remind the people before he died, because he knew he was coming to the end, to remind the people that, let's see where this is. He not only reminded them of the commandments of God, but he also exhorted them to keep the law and to teach it to their children. His advice was revealed to him by God in order that it might be written in a book. So God had Moses go back through all the law and tell it out loud to them, to remind them of all the law, to encourage them to teach it to their children. Teach it to your children and your children's children, and teach them to teach it to their children, because you've got to remember these laws. You've got to remember this covenant with God. And then, you know, so that somebody could write it down in a book, so that, you know, if somebody did forget, they could go and read the book again. And so Moses told them all this stuff. He warned them, you know, that after you get the land that God has promised you, you're going to get prosperous. And he warned them of the danger of becoming prosperous and falling away from God. Why is that dangerous to become prosperous?
Most of the time, people that do become prosperous, they start to think it's their accomplishments. They get the big head.
That, and if I've got millions of dollars just sitting in the bank, if I have a problem, I just throw some money at it, right?
Right.
I need a doctor. If that doctor ain't good enough, I go buy a more expensive doctor.
And you still gonna have the same sickness.
Well, but you start trusting in that money, trusting in all the prosperity instead of trusting in God. That's why a lot of times you'll see so many miracles happening, like in third world countries or in very poor areas, because they don't have prosperity to fall back on. They don't have prosperity to trust. They've got God, and that's it. You know. So you know, Moses reminded them, look, you're going to get in this land, and God has promised to make you prosperous. But when you get prosperous, don't forget the one who gave it to you.
Right.
And we need to be reminded of that as well. Somebody have a comment? Then it's interesting here too that, you know, he told them, when you get in the land, get between these two mountains, Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim, and there to read out loud and declare the blessings and the cursings, the blessings that come from obeying God and the curses that come from being disobedient. Again, it's just a reminder. Look, there's love and limits. You can live in the love and the blessings, but if you step across that line, there's limits. You break that limit, and there's a cursing that comes with it.
There's consequences.
Mm-hmm. So, God, after God had Moses do that, and he basically renewed the covenant with him and said, look, this is, we had a covenant. I had a covenant with Abraham. We did the circumcision, and during the time when they're wandering around in the wilderness, they stopped circumcising. And so God told Joshua, it's time to do it again. It's time to renew this covenant. And so even the grown men had to be circumcised to renew this covenant. And it was right after that when they went to fight with Jericho. We learned that here in the next lesson, I think. And Moses, God told Moses to hand down the blessing to Israel, for each tribe. He walked through and described how each tribe would be, what they'd be known for, kind of what their prophetic future would be. And after he had completed all this work, God took him up to Mount Nebo, allowed him to see the land of Canaan, the promised land. And after he was allowed to see it, then Moses died, and it seems that God buried him there. It's interesting, Moses was always going up on the mountain, but he always came back down, except this time. And a lot of people, because he, they didn't find the body. They never found the body. So some people theorize that Moses will be one of the two witnesses that come back in the end.
There's a reference to Moses' body in some of the New Testament. Read it to them. Go ahead. Yeah.
And then some people believe that Elijah will be one of them because he was caught up in the chariot and never actually died. And then some people believe that Enoch might be one of them because it says that he walked with God and then he was not, for God took him. So, there's three possibilities right there. We know that Moses died because the Bible tells us he died. But some people believe that Moses might be one of those two witnesses. I guess we'll see if we're here when that happens. I'm not really planning on being here at that time, but everybody else can check it out. And so for 30 days, the people mourned Moses' death. Joshua was chosen to be the new leader, and that leads us into the book of Joshua.
And there's a reference in Jude about Moses' body. Said talk about the angel and the devil arguing about Moses' body.
Yep.
It just made a reference to that.
Yeah, what was you planning on doing with the body? You were going to make him one of the walking dead or something? Y'all get anything? Enjoy that?
I said always.
Good deal.